Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. I got a big smile on my face because this is another special episode. It's live, so some of you guys are listening live. And I have with me Dr. Graham Oppy and Dr. Michael Huemer. And we're going to be talking about whether or not souls exist, and we're also going to be talking about Dr. Huemer's argument for reincarnation. I'm really excited about this conversation. I say conversation because it's not really like a formal debate or anything like that. It's going to be conversational, and I'll be kind of moderating. Maybe too much for some of you, maybe not enough for others, but it's my channel, so sorry, guys. We will be doing about an hour 15-ish of conversation, and then maybe half hour or so of questions. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and leave those in the live live chat, and I'll give priority to super chats. No guarantee we're going to get through all the super chats or anything like that. So if we don't cover yours, please consider that just a donation to the Pensées channel. Thank you. I'm really excited. So if you could keep them on topic, keep the questions on topic. That's probably better. Don't go too crazy on us, but we'll see. It's up to them whether they want to answer it or not. So without further ado, let's just jump in, and I'll pull in Dr. Oppy and Dr. Huemer. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise.
So before we jump in, I just want to give a huge thank you to both of you. Both of you guys are as the audience will know, great philosophers, and especially in the academic realm. You guys have published a lot of high-class work, but then both of you also do a lot of public philosophy, and you go on a lot of YouTube channels and not even gigantic ones all the time. And so I just really appreciate you guys and a lot of the audience. We've learned a ton from both of you guys. So thank you for all you do and giving us so much of your time, and then giving us your time tonight too.
Yep, you're welcome. It's been fun.
Awesome. Well, the pieces that I have in mind tonight are a critical notice of J.P. Moreland's Consciousness and the Existence of God by Dr. Graham Oppy, and that's in the European Journal for Philosophy of Religion. Also, his Consciousness, Theism, and Naturalism in Debating Christian Theism. And then two pieces by Dr. Huemer, Disembodied Souls Are People Too. I believe that's still forthcoming. Is that right, Dr. Huemer?
Yeah.
Do you know the name of the book offhand?
I don't know. It had something to do with extreme philosophy,
That's
but
right.
they might change the name.
Okay, all right. And then Existence is Evidence of Immortality. And I'm just so excited. So let's go. So we're gonna go in. The title is Do Souls Exist? And so we're gonna say, look, if the mind is immaterial, that's what we mean by soul. So we're gonna go over some arguments for the immateriality of the soul, or reasons to think that substance dualism is true. We'll use all these interchangeably. So Dr. Huemer, maybe I'll start with you. Well, actually, let me go over naturalism really quick. Dr. Oppy, you give this definition of naturalism. You say, quote, I take it that the core of naturalism is the claim that natural reality exhausts causal reality. There is no supernatural causation. That's it. And so I just wanted to ask Dr. Huemer, under that definition, would you consider yourself a naturalist?
I don't know. I don't actually know what natural means. I wouldn't say that the mind is supernatural. I guess supernatural means above nature, and I don't really understand the sense of above there. So it's not that I think that we're above physical objects or whatever, although I think the mind isn't physical.
Okay.
I assume Graham is going to say that I'm not a naturalist, though.
Well, perhaps I'm undecided about that, because, as you're kind of alluding to, the word natural is kind of got a lot of stretch in it, right? I mean, we'd have to say a lot more, which we probably don't want to go into now, to nail down a meaning for naturalism. And if we did that, we would be using the word in a way that lots of other people don't. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I had that as crossed off of my thing just in case we got in a quagmire, but you guys avoided it perfectly, so that's great. Well, Dr. Huemer, I want to start with qualia first. You give qualia as an argument, or maybe some arguments from qualia, for thinking that the mind is immaterial. Can you help us out? Why does qualia What is qualia first, and then
Yeah.
why think that it leads to substance dualism?
Yeah, so qualia are frequently said to be what it's like to have a mental state. It's supposed to be a property that a mental state has, and that property is what it's like. So this comes from Thomas Nagel's article, "What is it like to be a bat?" Where he says the fact that an organism is conscious means that there is something it is like to be that organism. So like you think intuitively, there's nothing that it's like to be a rock. But there's something that it's like to be a bat, for example, because bats are conscious beings. And actually, it's an interesting question and something unknown to us, what it's like to be a bat, because they navigate by echolocation, so they have information that's like the information we have when we look at things, but they're getting it by their ears. So what is that like? So anyway, okay. So there's there's some characteristic of the experience that's sort of like an inherently first person, whatever, first person nature. And that's, and it's this thing that, intuitively you think you would only be able to understand it if you have had similar experiences. So like, we don't know what it's like to be a bat because we've never had that experience. And then, okay, yeah. So, and what does this have to do with, physicalism? It's hard to explain what qualia are, in physical terms. Like this doesn't sound like a physical property. At least it's not what I would think the word physical referring to, right? Like sort of like feeling a certain way. And Nagel's article is, very interesting and of course very famous, like justly famous. Because like one of the things he talks about is he compares other cases in which there's a reductionist account of something. So like there's a reductionist account of heat. And he says, when you explain the nature of heat, you don't have to explain the feel of it. Like, right. And, that's good because when they say, oh, there are these molecules that are moving around fast, and like, that's what heat is. You're like, wow, that doesn't seem like that's what it is. But like, it's okay because you don't have to explain the feel of it because the feel of it isn't part of the phenomenon. The feel of it is the effect that the real external phenomenon produces in your mind.
Right.
So that's why the theoretical reduction doesn't have to explain that. But if you're trying to explain qualia, no, the feel of it is the phenomenon. Yeah. So you can't say, oh, we don't have to explain that part because that's just an effect that the phenomenon produces on human minds, right? Yeah. Okay, so, and then, Nagel says, and, justly, like, we don't like have a conception of how you could give a reductionist account of qualia.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Dr. Oppy, I thought I read somewhere that you don't believe in qualia.
Okay, so let's add a little bit more to the story. So I want to talk about a particular thought experiment, the one that Frank Jackson is really famous for, the neuroscientist in the black and white room. So the way that this story for many people kind of brings out the difficulties in giving any kind of, say, physicalist account of qualia, though whether I'm a physicalist is kind of open to debate. That's something that we'll come to in a bit. So Jackson asks us to imagine very well equipped I'll say neuroscientists, but we're to imagine that they're enclosed in a room where everything's in black and white. There's no colors, where you kind of imagine a way difficulties like, what if she takes a scalpel to herself or something like that? We're supposed to just pretend that doesn't happen, right? So, so all of her visual experience is in black and white, but we suppose that she's very well equipped, and she actually is so well equipped as a scientist, a physicist, that she knows everything there is to know about the physical state of the universe everywhere at all times. So she's got exhaustive physical knowledge. Maybe we don't have to make it quite that extensive, but we may as well for the purposes of the thought experiment. So So there's Mary in the black and white room. She knows all this physical stuff. So she knows everything about the physics of her brain. She knows everything about the physics of perception. She knows everything that you might think there is to know about color vision. Nonetheless, when she leaves the room and she looks at a ripe tomato for the very first time, something happens to her that gives her new knowledge, because despite all the knowledge that she had, she didn't know what it was like to look at a red thing until she left the room. And so the thought is that this shows that whatever we're going to think about the knowing what it's like for something to look red, it's clearly not going to be a physical property, because we assumed from the beginning that she knew everything there was to know about the physical properties. Okay, so I think that's a fair presentation of the thought experiment. So what do I think about this case? So my preferred view about the mind is very similar to Jack Smart's. So I'm a kind of old-fashioned identity theorist, roughly. So I think that, for example, perceptual states are largely, I mean, I'll ignore details about the kind of sort of relations to environmental history, environment, social relations, and so on, and just focus on the kind of brain. So, right, perceptual states are largely states of the brain. Now, what the kind of interesting question here is, if we're thinking about states as physical states of the brain, are there states that you can only know about fully if you're in them, right? So can you only know the kind of experiential dimension, as you might put it, of having the, looking at a red thing by being in the state of looking at a red thing or not, right? So here's a question, right? Is there some way that you could know about, from a physicalist point of view, about what it's like to look at a red thing, except by being in the state of looking at a red thing? Right. So there's two ways you could go here, right? Thinking about Mary. One thing is that you might think, look, while she's in the room, so long as she's equipped with enough surgical skill and knowledge and so on, she might be able to put herself into a state. She won't actually be looking at a red thing, but she'll be able to give herself, as it were, hallucinations of red things. And she'll be able to know what it's like because she's been able to put herself into that state. If she can't do that, then there's a kind of limitation on her because she can't occupy a certain state. That means that she will learn something when she leaves the room. Either way, it seems that this is perfectly consistent with the idea that the perceiving a red thing is a purely physical state, and that knowing what it's like for something to be red is also a purely physical state. So that's going to be the kind of way that I want to respond to the Jackson thought experiment.
Yeah, Dr. Huemer, do you think that is there a significant difference between Nagel's what it's like for a bat? Is that the same? Are they both relevantly similar knowledge arguments?
Well, I mean, they're both appealing to qualia. I mean, Nagel makes this point, which I guess is not in Jackson's article that I remember about. So, like comparing other theoretical reductions and, saying there's a disanalogy.
Can I say something about that? So, yeah. I mean, the heat case might look favourable, but compare lightning and electrical discharge, right? I mean, there the kind of qualia question just doesn't arise for that kind of reduction.
I mean, well, there's the look of the lightning, right? Which,
yeah, but we're not interested in that.
Yeah, well, right, but that's why the theoretical reduction is okay, right? So, like, you don't explain the look of lightning because we don't care. But in the case of qualia, you can't say, "Oh, we don't care."
Right, but as I see it, the kind of issue here is whether we think that there are certain states, physical states, that you can only know what they're like by being in them.
Yeah.
Right, and
Well,
that's perfectly. That's perfect. It seems to me that that's a perfectly consistent position for a
I mean,
physicalist like Smart. Assuming that Smart was a physicalist, I mean, he was certainly an identity theorist for him to
well,
take.
I mean, I'm not sure that that's
Because
the issue.
sorry.
I'm not sure that that's the issue, i.e., whether there are states that you can only know by being in them. So, like, I mean, I'm not sure that that's what the dualist is saying, right? So, I mean, it might be true that you can only know what it's like to see red by seeing red or hallucinating red. It might be true, but I don't think that's the essential point. So, like think about Hume's missing shade of blue, right? Where like, you've seen some other shades of colors. There's a particular shade of color that you haven't seen, but you can imagine it because you've seen other colors in the spectrum. So, like maybe that's possible, right? But I mean, I took it that the point was that it's possible to not know what one of these mental states is like, even though you know all the physical properties of it. And then that shows that
Right.
what it's like isn't one of the physical properties.
So I'm not sure how that doesn't fit with what I suggested. Right. It's possible for you not to know what it's like to be in certain kinds of physical states if you've never been in them. So it's possible for you to know to not know what it's like to be red, even though you know everything else about the physical properties. This is just for the physical properties, and there's a constraint on it, right?
Wait.
Because I mean, we just said at the beginning that Mary knows all the physical facts, but there's this question about whether she really does or not, right? You can't just
Okay.
stipulate it, right?
Uh,
So if this way
I
of
mean,
thinking, if it turned out to be true, that there are some physical facts that you can only know by being in certain kinds of physical states, then there's no mystery about the fact that she doesn't know them because we've prevented her from being in those states.
Oh
We
well,
just
yeah.
give an
So
example.
you'd have to say that Mary can't know all the physical facts in the locked room, right?
Yeah,
Because there's some that
that's
I think Tim Crane goes for that route too. Yeah.
uh,
But
I
then that's not
mean,
the thought experiment, right?
I mean, this
no, but
makes
well,
me feel like I've lost my grip on what physical facts means. Because
right.
like, I took it that if you're claiming that this is a physical fact, you mean it's like one of these things about the locations of the particles and their arrangement and
Right.
their mass and charge and whatever.
Okay, so now that's good because now we come down to this question about whether I'm a physicalist or not, because um, so I'm certainly not thinking that there's a reduction of all properties to microphysical properties, and some people who are physicalists want to go that way. So I describe myself as a naturalist, and maybe once I tell you what my view is, you'll think, well, you're just not a physicalist at all,
Well,
right?
Dr. Oppy,
So,
can
so
you use the type token distinction too? Like, are you a type um or do you go
so
in for type or
So
token? Yeah.
like a
so
human
that's
identity theorist. Yeah.
so that's a fair question. I think neither in the kind of way that Lewis opts for neither in Man
Ah,
Pain and Martian Pain. So you have a kind of restricted type identity. So there's a kind of, you know, what it's like to see red for humans or something like that. But it's not what it's like to see red full stop. But
okay.
maybe I'll go back to so I think of the universe as being, I don't know, we can think about the universe as having content at a whole lot of different scales. You can think of them as length dimensions. So we can think about if you could only see the universe at a very small level, right? You could kind of perceive it somehow. Well, let's not so you're very small, you're on the kind of scale of the things that you're looking at, and we're down at the level of the quarks, and you think about the kind of I'll say properties. I'm tempted to talk about predicates, but let's just say properties, right? So the properties of that you need in order to describe what you can see down there is a kind of very narrow range of properties that are all couched in the language of kind of microphysics. Bump up a few levels in the scale to say the level of molecules, or maybe a bit bigger, I don't know, proteins or something like that. And now when we start talking about the properties of things at this level, there'll be some new predicates that we need. We won't be able to just use these molecules have properties that quarks and electrons simply don't have. And so this is the kind of important part. I don't think that there's any way of defining the properties at the higher scale in terms of the properties at the lower scale, even in principle, right? So that there's an autonomy of the, I'll say, suppose we're now at the level of the chemical. Maybe that's not right, but at the scale of the chemical. I'm trying to not use the word level. I'm trying to stick with the word scale, right? At the scale of the chemical. And this sort of is true at other scales as well. So when you get to the scale at which we exist, there's a whole lot of properties that are properly attributed to us that molecules don't have and that quarks don't have. And when you move up to the very, very biggest scales, we go back to, I mean, it's not the same properties at the micro scale, but it's just some physical properties, the only properties that are kind of attributable to the universe at really large scales turn out again to be, it's just that they're properties that belong to cosmology rather than to the physics of the very small.
Are those like an emergent properties then? Would
So
use that word?
I don't like the word emergent, right? Because that kind of suggests that there's a privileging for
Yeah.
things at the lower level, whereas I'm stepping away from this kind of privileging idea altogether, right? So I don't think of this as emergence. I just think of it as a kind of scale independence. So
when it comes to the mind, do you go in for something like Davidson's anomalous monism then?
no, I'm an identity theorist, right? But that's not a cross scale identification, right? You've got two things on the same scale, right? And so when people talk about reduction, they often talk about levels, and they think that the most fundamental things are going to sit at the bottom level, right? So there are some people who've kind of pushed back against that kind of way of thinking. So, for example, I know John Hyle's written quite a bit where he's sort of attacking the idea that there are levels of reality. And my thinking seems to converge with John's in various ways, and this is one of them.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Huemer, what do you make of that?
I mean, it was sounding like the theory of emergence until he said that he didn't like the word emergence.
Right. That's what.
But I wonder if it's actually substantively is the theory of emergence, but you just don't like the term.
So it might be. It depends. It depends. What I mean, I'm not that familiar with what people have written about emergentism, so I would want to go and look to see whether it fits. Yeah. So here's one thing that I think is true, and maybe emergentists all accept this as well. But think about the space that I occupy, me, the kind of the organism, and think about what happens if you look at different scales just within the volume of space that I occupy. If you go down to the microphysical level, all you will find there are quarks and electrons, right? There are no, and those things don't have proto-consciousness or proto-mental properties or anything like that. And as you move up through the scales, you'll find is things that have chemical properties or biological properties or whatever as you go up and down the scales. So I don't know. Maybe emergentists think that too. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, do you get to qualia? I think that's Dr. Huemer's. That's one of the points. Like, do you believe in qualia? At some point, does it? I don't know what else to say besides emerge, but does it come forth?
So that depends on whether we stick with what it's like. So think about the ability to tell what color something is just by looking at it, right? That's presumably when she's in the black and white room. Mary just doesn't have that ability, because you can't have that ability unless you've seen some red things and some yellow things and some orange things, leaving aside the hallucination route, or messing with your brain or whatever. So I don't think of their qualia if those are kind of distinctively mental things or substances or something like that. But I'm prepared to go along with the idea that there are certain skills that we have that depend upon our having been in certain kinds of states, so that we know what it's like to be in those states. Maybe that's enough to commit me to qualia. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm really curious, Dr. Huemer. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, so I don't think that we merely have skills. Right? So, like, when Mary learns what it's like to see red, so it's true that maybe she requires a new skill for like identifying tomatoes and stuff. That's true, but also there's something else, which is that she knows a fact, which is that seeing red is like this, right? So right, like you can imagine different ways the world could have been. Like there are different ways that seeing red could have been like, or it could have been different qualitative characters of that experience.
Yeah.
And when she sees a tomato for the first time now, like her evidence rules out a bunch of alternatives. Right.
So I'm not sure whether that's different. I mean, it sounded different, but maybe it's the same as what I said, that she knows what it's like to see red. And that's a kind of knowledge that you can only have by being in the state of looking at something that's red, set up in the right kind of way.
But so she used that ability, I think, if I'm tracking Dr. Huemer, she used that ability to see red that she gained to then come to that phenomenal fact of red. And now, like, she has that, right? She can remember what it's like to see red and such, right? Like, does that seem right? So it's not just the ability. The ability was used to acquire a phenomenal fact.
Yeah. I mean,
well, you might think it was the other way around, right? She had to know what it was like in order to have the ability, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of,
well,
the
either
kind
way,
of activation of the ability requires the knowledge. You have to know what it's like.
Yeah. I mean, so my interpretation of the case is, okay, she looks at the tomato and then she has a sensation, which we call the sensation of red, and she's directly aware of it because she's a self-conscious being, and she's aware of it having this particular qualitative character. She simultaneously forms the concept of that, because like she wouldn't even have the concept without having experienced it. But also now she knows that qualitative character is experienced by people who are looking at red things and not some other qualitative character. So she's ruled out a set of possible worlds and ruled in a set of possible worlds. So that's a proposition, right? And also, like, there's a property that the experience has, which she didn't know that it had before. And so yeah, so and it looks like that property doesn't look like it's a physical property. If you say it is a physical property, I need to hear more about how that's a physical property.
Right. So I tried to tell the story about why I think it's a physical property before. But maybe, I mean, sorry, we had this disagreement about whether it's physical, right? And sorry, about whether I'm a physicalist, right? Because on the kind of emergentist view, if that's what my position is, it's not clear that I'm saying it's a physical property, right? But it seems to me that that if we're going to think about what sort of property is, it's going to be something like a neural property.
Yeah, so I want to move on to intentionality, but before I do, I wanted to ask each of you a question about dogs, which I think could clear some stuff up, or maybe not in Dr. Huemer's case, but Dr. Oppy. So if you were a type mind brain identity theorist, if you went in for the type identity theorist thesis, then a dog and you would not have the same red qualia experience, right? Because it wouldn't that the type would be a physical thing in your brain, and I think this is what the multiple realizability argument against identity theory of the type variety goes with.
Yeah.
If you were a token theorist, it seems like that's functionalism to me and not identity theory, right? Like there's a type that can be multiply realized in the dog or in you, and as long as they're playing the same functional role. So when it comes to you and maybe my dog, do you guys both see red?
Okay, so one of the things that you said is really quite historically interesting, which is the question about whether identity theory and functionalism are compatible, consistent
Yeah,
or not. So
right.
there was a kind of division of opinion in the 60s between kind of North American theorists like Putnam, who thought that they were inconsistent, and Antipodean theorists like Armstrong, who thought that they were perfectly consistent. And interestingly, Lewis sided with Armstrong on this question
Makes
against
sense. That Australian
Putnam,
connection there.
but he did it, I think, by slightly changing the way that he was thinking about it, because he wasn't thinking that there's a single type here that everything has. He was thinking that maybe types would be restricted by kinds of entities. So
Okay.
maybe dog color vision really is a slightly different type of thing from human
Yeah.
color vision. But he was assuming that amongst humans there was a common type
Okay.
for seeing red, for example.
So maybe it could go along with like natural kinds or something like that. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to cash it out. Dr. Huemer, if and I maybe I shouldn't have picked dogs because I think they say dogs are colorblind, but let's just stipulate the dogs aren't colorblind right now, so I don't look too stupid. But Dr. Huemer, you to have a qualia experience, you use qualia in order to argue for substance dualism. Does that mean if you and my puppy can both see red, that my puppy also has a soul?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and anything with mental states has a mind.
Okay.
And like the arguments that your mind isn't physical would, obviously also apply to the mind of anything that has a mind. So I mean, it's
Okay.
not like some of the minds are physical and some of them aren't. Right?
That's what because I think Descartes was like, no, they're just automata, right? Like
Yeah.
anything
I
that's
mean,
not us.
yeah. So he's denying that it has the experience at all. So
Okay.
then it would be
Okay.
purely physical. But
Gotcha. But if you think they do have that experience, okay.
yeah.
Well, anything to tie up before we jump on to intentionality? We could spend the rest of the time on qualia here, but I want to cover some more.
Yeah. I mean, we can move on.
Yeah, and we can come back to maybe a cumulative, throw them all together and see what sticks. So we got intentionality. Dr. Huemer, you say that intentionality is another peculiar property of mental states. That is it evidence for? This was something I wanted to ask you about. Is it evidence for substance dualism, or does it logically entail substance dualism, or does it point to what do you? What's the
I should
strength
say
of the
that.
evidence?
I mean, like the structure of the reasoning was that these things are evidence for dualism. So like intentionality and qualia, but they don't distinguish between substance and property dualism. So like these are just evidence that there is a different kind of property because qualia are apparently a non-physical property and intentionality also. And then how you get from dualism general to substance dualism is you have to look at the problem of personal identity.
Yeah.
But I take it that once you become some kind of dualist, it's not that much further to go to say, just substances and not only properties. Anyway, in what way does it support? What way does intentionality support dualism? I guess so. Like my feeling is, I guess I think that it's metaphysically impossible for intentionality to be physical. I guess I shouldn't say that I'm 100% certain of that, though. So I guess I would say it inconclusively. So I guess I would say it's evidence.
Okay.
Like in the way that intuitions are evidence, I guess.
Okay. You just brought up intuitions, and that's another thing we could spend the rest of the time debating definitions of. But
yeah.
Well, okay, so we have an intentionality.
Wait, does everybody in the audience know what intentionality is and
Oh
stuff?
yeah, hit us. Yeah, but they probably do if they listen to my stuff. I do
Yeah,
a lot of philosophy of mind type stuff. But if you wanted to real briefly, a
yeah.
lot of
Anyway,
them are
yeah,
master students. So yeah.
it's the property of being about something. So like when you have a thought, your thought is about something,
Hmm.
and that's a weird property. Like that, so it like doesn't sound like that's a physical property. Like physical properties sound like things like the mass or the shape or size or whatever, and like property of referring to something doesn't sound physical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me just follow up really quick and ask about like I think we probably talked about this before, but what about like the rings in a tree? If you go in for like a type of information theory and you say it looks like those rings in the tree are about the age of the tree, and yet they're physical.
Yeah, that totally doesn't seem to me like they're about anything. They're
Okay.
just rings. Okay,
Okay.
I mean, the best I can figure is that people are sort of like projecting. Like when you see the rings, you take the rings as evidence for
Yeah.
something. So
Yeah.
like you have a mental state that represents the tree as a certain age because of
Okay.
that. But like the
I think
tree isn't
Searle calls it
representing anything.
derivative. Yeah, it's like derivative intentionality, but not intrinsic. Yeah. Well, Dr. Oppy, what do you make of all this?
So I think that most people think that intentionality is less of a problem for physicalists
Hmm.
than sort of consciousness and qualia. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that there are still lots of people who kind of side with the Australians and think that you can be an identity theorist and a functionalist, and they think that kind of from functionalism you get a reasonable account of sort of intentional attitudes like belief and desire and so on. Aboutness really isn't as challenging as consciousness. That would be the one comment that I'm inclined to make here. Maybe that's part of the reason why Mike's less inclined to think that it's kind of conclusive
Well,
Yeah.
consideration.
if you go in for identity theory, then the mental state. Would you say the mental state is the brain state?
Yeah, rough. That's the
So
identity
then
theory.
that brain state, then you do have something that's physical that's about something. Is that you would say the
Yeah,
physical things
sure.
can be about
Yeah,
things?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, a physical state can have representational content if it happens to be a state of an organism like us, right? And
Okay.
there's no, there's, I mean, there's lots of different projects in philosophy of mind that have tried to spell out physicalist or naturalistic ways of getting content, teleological theories of content.
Yeah.
Oh, there's all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff there. I don't think we want to go down that
Yeah.
rabbit
Yeah.
hole
Yeah.
in this
So
conversation.
yeah, I mean, so Graham is of course correct that like in philosophy of mind, people are more happy with reductionist accounts of intentionality than they are with reductionist accounts of qualia, and I guess I have somewhat of the same feeling. Like I don't feel happy about either of them, but the like reductionist accounts of qualia seem like more counterintuitive.
Mm.
Like just seems like more obvious that that's not what qualia is. You can say things that sound sort of vaguely plausible about what intentionality might be, though I don't ultimately buy them.
Yeah. It's a relation between two, yeah, relata or something like that. Well, let's jump on to free will because that might be a little bit more spicy. Um, and again, Dr. Huemer, you and I have talked about this on our episode, but you talk about I think you might mention even libertarian free will, and that is another feature of the mind, which points to it being immaterial. But I know Dr. Oppy is not going to buy that one. So actually, Dr. Huemer, let me just pass it to you. So can you just fill us in about free will here?
Yeah. Actually, so I found out that Oppy is a compatibilist, so
Hmm.
we might have to argue about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It looks like we have free will, and it looks like that's not compatible with determinism. And you start thinking like, how can you explain, you know, what this free will thing is? And then assuming that you don't want to just reject it. Okay, I guess we'll just assume that. So, um, you're like, okay, and why do I think it's not compatible with determinism? Like I have examples like this. So Okay, so let's say a student comes to me near the end of the semester and says, "Hey, Mr. Huemer," because students call you Mister because they don't know your title anyway, because that's what they call their high school teachers. Okay, all right. So, hey, Mr. Huemer, how do I get an A in this class? And let's say I say something like, "Well, in order to get an A, you would have to have at least gotten an 87% average on the first 4 tests. And actually, your average was 75. Now, what can the student infer from this? It looks like he can infer that he can't get an A, right? And by the way, don't say that he could get an A by convincing me to change the grading scale or something like that, okay? Because just assume that what I said is true, that he would have to, it's a necessary condition, he would have to have gotten 87%, and he didn't. So then he can't get an A, okay? And what this illustrates is that if, in order for you to do A, something would have to have happened in the past that did not happen, then you can't do A. Okay, now if determinism is true, then in order for you to do anything different from what you actually do, stuff would have to have happened in the past, going all the way back to the Big Bang, stuff would have to have been happening that didn't happen. It is not what happened, right?
Yeah.
Like we would have to have been in a different state at the time of the Big Bang. And that's not the case. So you can't do anything different from what you actually do. So it sounds like you don't have free will.
Yeah, Dr. Oppy, what do you make of that?
Okay, so I suspect that the world is not deterministic in the big scale, right? So it's not the case that the laws plus initial conditions, assuming that there's initial conditions, right? So assuming there's an initial state, determine everything that comes after. In particular, I suspect, though this is, admittedly it's controversial, but I think that there's quite a lot of indeterminacy at the kind of quantum level. So there's lots of chancy events. And at, say, right down there at the scale of the quarks and electrons, there's quite a lot of chance down there. And some of the chance can kind of percolate up. There are ways, in fact, if you want, assuming that there is quantum indeterminism and assuming that Geiger counters are sensitive to it, you can, taking as your kind of model the dice man, you can be the quantum dice man or woman or whatever. You can be and use your quantum dice to make your behavior both non-determined and unpredictable whenever you like, just by kind of sampling the indeterminacy that's there. Nonetheless, I think that at the level of organisms like us, there are lots of cases where, like over a period of deliberation, were you to kind of, if you had the ability to wind back a little bit the clock and run it again, you just get the same result over and over. There's a kind of, as it were, local determinism, which is vulnerable to various kinds of things. So when I assume that you run it again, I'm assuming that, for example, there isn't some sort of chance thing that plays differently and sends an intervener that's, so that you end up getting struck by lightning before you finish the course of deliberation or whatever. But it's kind of robust enough that it will support counterfactuals. So, were we to run it again, like in all nearby worlds, you'd get the same outcome. That gives you something that's not determinism. It certainly gives you something that's not vulnerable to anything like Van Inwagen's consequence argument, but it still gives you something that people who think about libertarian freedom probably aren't going to like, because set the circumstances exactly the same and across a very wide range of nearby worlds, you're just going to get the same result everywhere. There's a sense in which you actually can't do otherwise. It's not that there aren't really remote worlds, but there's, right. So I'm inclined to think that we don't, in any very strong sense, have libertarian freedom. It's not what you need is a kind of compatibilist conception of freedom. What it is to act freely is just to act on your normally acquired beliefs and desires in the absence of defeaters of various kinds. That's the kind of freedom we have. It's all the freedom that we need.
Well,
Okay,
so
sorry, that's a little bit complicated, but that's the answer.
I think we might be able to get down to the crux of the matter if we, because I had this conversation with Dr. Huemer, and I said, I'm a compatibilist, but I believe in divine determinism, and I still think I can have rational deliberation and interactionism because I'm a substance dualist. I wonder if, to me, it seems like Dr. Oppy, like the physicalism is a problem, not necessarily the determinism, because your beliefs that you're acting on, even in your compatibilistic freedom, aren't those beliefs produced by like non-rational forces, like the laws of physics, like the neurochemistry? They don't seem like they're. It's like the rational laws, right?
So, I mean, you go back to what I said previously about scales. It comes
Yeah.
back here
Okay.
importantly. It's not that there's a determination of what happens at what you see at higher scales by what there is at lower scales. So the relationship isn't a unidirectional thing. So the when you're kind of down there at the level of the quarks and the electrons, you may see a whole bunch of quarks and electrons moving in a certain kind of way. The reason why they're moving that way is because I'm waving my arm around, right? It's not. So it's not that I'm thinking that the
But why are
kind
you?
of
I guess why are
direction
you?
of explanation of here,
Yeah.
the direction of explanation here goes in one direction.
Does it?
Right. So you're right to point to the idea that there are two different kind of determination worries. One of which is sort of past to future,
Yeah.
and one of which is micro to macro. And what I've tried to give is reasons for rejecting both of those worries.
So there's like an interaction. There's an interactionism on your identity theory, such that like you're. I guess I just wonder. You're waving your hand around, and that's making the quarks do stuff. But what made you wave your hand around was
Well,
the previous state, which was
state of my brain. But remember that you're not. This isn't determined by what happened at the Big Bang, because there's lots of indeterminacy, some of which,
yeah.
in the way that Geiger counters can cause the indeterminacy to percolate up, there are other ways that
So
indeterminacy can percolate
that's why I
up.
thought you were going with like an anomalous monism. Like once you get to this emergent level, there are no laws determining the beliefs.
So I don't think that's right.
Right.
So at any point in time, that there'll be kind of laws of this kind. So long as there's no interventions from outside, this closed system will evolve in this way.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay,
Dr.
so
Huemer. Yeah, please.
yeah, no, I mean it sounded like you're proposing downward causation, right? And and I'm happy with downward causation, but almost no physicalists are.
So except I mean downward causation. I mean, maybe this is kind of like emergentism. I guess maybe that's the right label.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Huemer, follow up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like if we found out that this was definitely true, dualists would declare victory.
So, well, I don't see why not substance dualists, because there's no. I mean, there's no mental substances anywhere in this story, right?
It sounds like
What's happening at the
yeah.
on the human scale is just stuff that's happening in your brain.
Yeah, no, I mean property dualists would declare victory.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like
So
there's this higher level, the highest scale. Sorry, not level, but the highest scale seems like it could just be property dualism or like Hasker's emergent dualism of some kind.
so again, I'm not sure that I'm seeing that, but then maybe that's because the thing that I thought was important was kind of about the natural rather than about the physical. And that people, not you, but lots of people who are dualists want there to be kind of supernatural substances.
Yeah, that's why I wanted Dr. Huemer on, because he
Right.
doesn't have a bone to pick in this fight.
Yeah. So like yeah, I'm not totally sure what natural is, but like yeah, like I don't think God created us or whatever, or like I don't know. Maybe there is a God. Maybe He did create us, but that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
And like the non-physical things are caused, and they have physical causes, and they'll be caused according to laws, and they won't be caused according to magic.
So I don't think they're non-physical. I mean, the brain has. I mean, to go back to the thought before about if you probe it at lower scales in the space that you occupy, you don't find anything except physical stuff that's conforming to physical laws. Right. So there's a certain sense in which I am physical. Right. That's the sense in which I'm physical.
Oh well, I mean the stuff that your body's made of is physical, and we can agree on that, and we could disagree about whether there's some other substance, right? But
Yeah, that's right. We could disagree about whether there's some other substance, and perhaps
like the properties that you have are not all physical properties.
That's what I was going to bring up, like pain, especially if you're not going in for the type theory, right?
Well, a restricted type theory, though, so it'll turn out to be neural.
It still is. Okay.
Yeah, but so I mean, I think I agree that the kind of important question is about the way in which, say, biological properties or psychological properties or whatever are related to the physical properties. Is there some definitional connection there? Is there some definitional connection in principle? Well, I just say no. And if that's all that you want to say, then maybe we don't disagree about anything substantively.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely disagree about the mental substance. I mean,
yeah, so no, we definitely disagree about that.
Well, Dr. Huemer, do mental states have spatial location?
Oh, I think not.
Okay, because I know that's one that yeah, Dr. Oppy would be committed to that, right?
Yeah, and like why am I saying that? Well, it's just sort of intuitive. Like, okay, I say, I have a thought, and you're like, where's the thought? Like, well, like a question of where the thought is sounds to me kind of like a category mistake. Like, where's the number 4?
So that might be because you're mixing up the kind of occurrent versus dispositional vocabulary here. So where's my perceiving happening? Well, I think I know where that's happening. I think that's happening in my brain.
Yeah. Well, I know where the brain process is happening, but I don't know where the experience is happening.
Right, but then I don't think there's any. That's, on my view, that's all there is going on, right? So
yeah.
Well, maybe I could push Dr. Huemer. If you don't know where the experience is happening, but I'm having this experience in my office, right? And I'm not having an experience on Mars.
Yeah.
And it's presumably because, like I'm located here.
Yeah.
And if I am, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, you're saying, I is ambiguous. Your body is located in there. And so, I think it might just be like a confusion where you're sort of like, because we have the word that refers to your body and your mind, then you sort of like, you get confused into thinking that the mental states are located there.
Yeah.
Right. You can ask other questions about the mental states, like, what shape is it? And what size is it? How big is my belief that Paris is in France? And what shape is that? Like that.
So those are kind of odd questions to ask about states, though, like neural states. You're going to, and processes, questions like how big are they?
Yeah.
Feel like they're kind of category errors anyway. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they have size and shapes. I mean, if the thing is like, it's a pattern of activation of neurons, that might have a size and shape, right? Because
You could draw them. Yeah, you'd be looking textbooks, right?
Well, at a point in time, but if you think about what it looks like over time, and you think about how many different things are going on in your I'll talk about it the way you want to in your mental life at any one time. It may be very hard to pick out any bit of it and say this bit is just uniquely the seeing of the red rather than the seeing of the shape of the thing, or the seeing that it's got a boundary there and there's this other thing behind it, or whatever.
So it might be hard, but in principle, like that's the the problem of vagueness or something, right? Like, is there maybe epistemologically it's hard for us to pick that out, but do you think in principle there is a story, there's a matter of fact that this string would be from here, this neuron to this neuron would be the thought or the experience, even if we can't know it?
So I doubt it. I doubt that
Okay.
the story is going to, that the neurophysiological story is going to have that kind of simplicity.
Okay. I wonder, it kind of brings up, like, this wasn't part of Dr. Huemer's arguments, but like the unity of phenomenal consciousness, where it seems like our consciousness is unified, and it seemed like maybe you're even making that point just there, Dr. Oppy, that it doesn't seem like we can just chunk off different parts of the brain and say there's one thing. Is that are you familiar with that argument? And is it
Yeah, it doesn't seem
forceful
like
at all?
it's going to be a problem, though.
Okay. So long as the brain is
Because,
unified.
well, because we're familiar with doing, maybe you want to call it abstraction or something, focusing on some aspects of physical processes and just ignoring others. That's a kind of familiar thing that we do. So I'm not sure that it's any more problematic when we're thinking about our mental lives than it is with any other sort of, fluid flows or other complicated things that we might look at.
Okay. Well, I thought we could move. I'm not sure we made a ton of progress in moving either one of you at all, but that wasn't the goal. We're just to talk about it. But I wanted to broach Dr. Huemer's like arguments for the infinite past, and this does come into play with your substance dualism and why you think we exist now because we have been reincarnated. Like the whole thing, I'm gonna butcher it. But Dr. Huemer, can you lay that out for us?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. So I think we talked about the reincarnation argument on a previous episode of your podcast.
Yeah. So you don't have to go in too much because the audience will be familiar, and if they're not, there's a whole episode on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like here's the short version, right? So suppose that people could only live once, then, and suppose also, as I'm assuming that the time is infinite both in the past and in the future. Okay, so then on those assumptions, what's the probability that you would be alive now specifically? Looks to me like it's zero. Right, so out of all the infinite past, because like you should have been born at some previous time, and if you can only live once, and that would have prevented you from being here now, unless your being born is a probability zero event, in which case you also shouldn't be here now. Right, and so okay, but you are here now, so the theory that assigns zero probability to them is disconfirmed, right? Maximally disconfirmed. So it's not true that you can only live once. Or I'm wrong about the past being infinite. Right?
Yeah. Well,
so can I ask you just a question about? I mean, I want to focus on the past bit, but I want to ask you a question about this. Whatever happens now will be probability zero. So isn't your argument going to entail that we? I mean, it's not just a problem about your existence. It's about anything that happens that's happening right now.
I don't think that everything has probability zero.
No, that it should be happening right now.
Given the infinite
that's happening
past
right now, given the infinite past and the infinite future, it's not just your existence, but your office, the earth.
Well, I mean, so my office, like this might also recur, right, many times, right? Yeah. So it can, and so there will be some, and so it exists for a certain period of time, and it recurs over and over again throughout the infinite history of the universe. So, at any given time, there's a non-zero probability, right? It's a non-zero proportion of the time that the office exists.
Well,
but
Doctor,
no, but if there was a problem about you sort of existing just once, there'll be the same problem about everything else.
but
right?
and everything else doesn't have souls, right? That was your point about needing a soul, but your office presumably doesn't have a soul.
Right. So, I mean, the argument might be, oh, look, Huemer's argument for reincarnation also implies that like tables can be reincarnated, like this office can be reincarnated. Okay. And then, like, is that bad? I don't know. Right. So I believe that in one sense, that's true. Like, there will happen over and over again, there will happen an office that's qualitatively like this. And now, whether or not that counts as the same office, well, then, like you could have a debate about that. But I think that might just be a semantic question. And so, like, if you don't think that the office can recur, that might be because you're just sort of like stipulatively defining it to not be the same office, no matter how similar it is, right? But I think you can't just stipulatively define, a future person to not be me, right? Like, it's not a verbal question whether a future person is me or not.
So I'm not clear about that. Why? What's the difference that matters here? Is it that you think that you kind of remember past lives, whereas the office doesn't?
Yeah, I don't remember any past lives. And I know some people claim to remember past lives, but they're probably wrong, or they might be hoaxes. But anyway, no, I didn't like. I want you to have the intuition that for any person that exists at any time, like there's an objective fact about whether it's you or not. There's got to be a fact about whether you exist at a time or not. And it's not just like a matter of decision. Like maybe this helps to sort of like pump your intuitions, right? So like, suppose you think it's just a verbal question whether something counts as me. So then, suppose like I want to live longer, so I'm going to just try to get people to talk as if some person who's going to be born in the future is me. Like if I get them to talk in a certain way, that's going to make that person be me, and then I'm going to live longer. So like now I've got a super strong reason for trying to change the way people talk. And you're supposed to think, no, that's not right. That is not correct.
So that doesn't sound good, but I don't see why. What's wrong with the view, as far as this goes, of just thinking that those future things or those past things weren't me. There's just a fact of the matter, and the fact of the matter is that they're not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point that I was getting at there was just that there's a fact. It's not just a purely verbal question, which is different from ordinary like inanimate objects, where at least some have the intuition that there isn't a fact about whether you have the same.
Okay, so I certainly don't have that intuition. I mean, it struck me the office and you were in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, but like, do you think that it's obviously false that the office will occur again? Is that a bad view?
So, well, maybe we should go back and talk about whether the past is infinite or not at this point.
Yeah.
And I doubt that anything is obvious, and that's kind of true in general in philosophy. But so, on your view, the most probable view to have about the kind of shape of causal reality is that it's infinite in both directions. It's infinite in the past and it's infinite in the future. I think kind of going by, at least by the physics, the most plausible view is it's finite in the past and infinite in the future. And this might be kind of curious, but I think the next most plausible view is that it's finite in both directions. And the only view that's less plausible than yours is the one that has it infinite in the past and finite in the future, which I think is very hard to kind of
right. Nobody thinks that.
Get your head around. Yeah, no, I don't think there are many people who think that.
Yeah.
So why do I think this? Well, and also, and so that's one kind of question, and then there's this other question about recurrence, and I think that physics, the serious physics about the future, tells seriously against that as well. So I mean, I guess part of it is just it's kind of standard. The kind of most widely accepted view amongst physicists seem to be finite past and infinite future. I mean, there are some who think that there's a multiverse. Maybe we can put that to one side and just focus on the kind of one universe view. If we go with the one universe view, then some people have thought maybe there could be cycling, expansion and contraction, but we seem to be pretty confident that there's not going to be another contraction. So the kind of cycle of expansion and contraction is not looking good. And there's this other problem about entropy. The entropy doesn't decrease when you have a contraction, it goes on increasing. So it feels like every universe is going to start with maximum entropy and ours doesn't. So there's a bunch of reasons why the kind of finite past, infinite future looks better, I think.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of things to comment on there. I don't know, like, okay, so does entropy always increase over time? Well, in our experience, yes, but every once in a while, entropy is going to decrease, not systematically, but just by chance, right? And if you did like, if you're in a limited region of phase space, like you're guaranteed to repeat your initial conditions, right? Like just by chance, and it's it's going to take a really long time, but actually like the number of transitions from high to low entropy is equal to the number of transitions from low to high entropy if you have infinite time, right?
So that's assuming that you kind of have finite cycling. But this is the other point I wanted to make, is that on the kind of views of the future of the universe that there's a nice book by Adams and Lachlan about the likely future of the universe, and it goes kind of at a very big picture. It kind of goes like this: in about 10 to the 40 years, protons will decay. After that, the only things that will form will be black holes. About 10 to 150 years from now, the last black hole will decay by Hawking radiation. Thereafter, the universe goes on expanding. All it contains is the odd blip of radiation, and it goes on expanding forever. And there's no protons don't come back, never mind stars and people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the kind of serious future, as said. I mean, the kind of view that when you push the physicists, that's the one that they go for. So the kind of the repetition thing just doesn't look good from that standpoint.
I mean, I think there's just a bunch of things that we don't understand. So going back to the finite past, okay, because like I think the past is infinite. Well, okay. So, but there are these people who think the past is finite, like it began 14 billion years ago at the time of the Big Bang, and then I just find this an unsatisfactory theory. And so, okay, so on this theory, what happened? The universe. So 14 billion years ago, there was the universe. There was like a huge amount of matter and energy in a tiny region, with ridiculously low entropy, right? Which, okay, and it was moving outward. And that was just the first thing that happened for no reason. And that's the theory. And there can't be any explanation for why that thing happened, because they're saying it's the beginning of time. So nothing could cause it. Okay. I think that's an unsatisfactory theory. And so here's part of my illustration of how that's unsatisfactory. I'm going to give you a better theory. Okay, the better theory is the universe started in the year 1950. It popped into existence in 1950 in the state that it was in 1950, just already like that, complete with everybody having false memories of, of the past that never happened and everything. Okay, and then just goes forward from there. And that explains all of the observations that we've made since 1950, assuming you were born after 1950, explains all of your observations just as well, just as much as the Big Bang Theory. And you're like, oh, but this is super improbable that it would pop into existence in that state. Yeah, but like that's just like the Big Bang posit, that it just popped into existence. In fact, in the Big Bang theory, it popped into existence in an even less probable state, right? Because because we had higher entropy in 1950 than we did in 14 billion BC, and higher entropy means that's a more probable state.
Yeah.
So actually, if you're going to pick a starting state for the universe, the 1950 state is way, way more probable than the Big Bang thing. So
right, but there's a problem with that argument. I mean, there are various problems with it, but one is that 1950s obviously not the best choice that you could make. It's inferior to 1951, for example, and in fact, it's going to be inferior to right now. Right, the universe just began right now. That's going to be better. But the problem is that that's an unstable theory, because in a minute you'll want to shift the theory, right? So if you want to be sort of consistent over time in your choice of a theory, you're not going to pick any of those obviously skeptical scenarios, right? Because for any one that you pick, there are better ones that you'll want to pick tomorrow.
Well, I don't see this as saving the Big Bang. I mean,
yeah, well, there's no non-arbitrary starting point that comes after the Big Bang.
No, but this is not this is not an answer to the skeptic, right? So you're right. Maybe the best theory is it appeared just now at this instant. Okay. And then you're like, oh, but you don't want to say that, because if you say that, then you're going to change your view in a minute. How does that show that that's not the best view, right? Okay, so then in a minute from now, the best theory is going to be that the universe just began at that time. So.
Well, and wouldn't it only be a little bit more probable because it's only a few seconds difference in entropy, whereas 1950 the difference between entropy there and the initial Big Bang is much broader.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and there's been I'm not actually advocating the 1950 theory.
You convinced me though, dang it.
Right. So I'm saying what's wrong with that is, it's not a good theory to have the universe just start existing for no reason. Right. So I'm rejecting all of the theories. Right. And also the Big Bang thing. It shouldn't just be starting for no reason in some super improbable state.
So I don't know whether we want to go there, but I do think that there's something else that you can say if you have the kind of single universe theory starting from an initial singularity. If you want to have an explanation for the initial state, you can claim that it's necessary, and now you've got an explanation of why it happened. It happened because it had to. I can see you raising all eyebrows at once. So the way that I'm thinking about this is that when you need to think about what's the best theory of metaphysical modality, and the one that I like is one that says that all worlds share some history with the actual world, branch off from it because chances play out differently. So you've got a kind of Storrs-McCall picture about what the metaphysical possibilities are, and immediately falls out of that picture that if there's an initial state is necessary. So that was how you get there. Right. So this runs against the kind of standard conceivability views of metaphysical possibility, which I don't like. I would rather not multiply possibilities beyond necessity. The only ones you need are the ones you need for chances. So let's just leave it there.
Well, wait. I mean, the only one we need is the actual world. I mean, we could say that that's the only possible world.
Well, not if there are chances, though, right? Because you're committed, where there's chances, you're committed to saying there's other ways it could have gone. Yeah. Right. So that gives you there are possibilities, but you don't need any other possibilities except the ones that
yeah, but chances. I mean, saying there are chances, that's not part of the evidence, right? I mean, the evidence that we have is just observing the actual world.
Well, it depends what you're counting as. It depends. If we think of quantum mechanics as the best theory for explaining a certain amount of the evidence, and quantum mechanics says that there are chances, then that's how you get the commitment to chances, right? Where you're thinking about all the different bits of the theory that you're going to commit to. And so the bit that I'm picking on here is that and it's controversial, is that that quantum mechanics is a really good theory of the world, and the best interpretation of it commits you to chances.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. So, I was thinking like, well, why doesn't somebody say, okay, the actual world is the only possible world? Yeah. Okay. So like if quantum mechanics implies that, there are other possibilities, then, it's false. But like the theory according to which the actual world is necessary predicts everything that we've actually observed. It's like it predicts all the observations, right?
Because we don't
So,
observe chances.
But
Is
it
that
doesn't
right?
give you the most economical theory. I mean, depending on your views, you might think that if you suppose that everything is necessary, then everything is going to turn out to just be kind of, it couldn't have been otherwise. It turns out to be kind of brute. So you have a very uneconomical theory. Why did this happen next? Well, it had to, and that's the only thing that you can say about it.
And we lose our libertarian
I
free
think
will.
the one possible worldview doesn't strike me as kind of theoretically virtuous in all respects. It doesn't compress your evidence in any interesting ways, for example.
Yeah.
Is it simpler though, Dr. Huemer?
Yeah.
Well, not if what I just said was right, but
it depends on what you mean by simpler, right? So like, there are fewer possible worlds. If those are supposed to be things that exist, then it's committed to fewer things existing. It's simpler in that way. I don't know.
Well, you don't have chances either, right? Like whatever.
You might
chances
say,
are.
oh, yeah, it's super yeah, that's right. You don't have to say research. Yeah,
Yeah.
You might say, oh, it's super complicated because, so it says there's only one thing, but the description of that one thing is super complicated. Like, every fact, right?
Whereas if you've got some, if you've got some genuine theories, you can compress a whole lot of the description, and you might think, as I do, that makes for a better theory. So.
Yeah, I mean, well, so you have a shorter description, but it doesn't explain everything, right? So like the shorter description says, oh, there are these laws. These laws give you probabilities of things happening. Okay, if the description specifies, and here's what happened, so like there was this probability and this probability, and then this one is the one that was actualized, oh, then that's just as complicated, or more so actually, than the one that just says, the entire description of the actual world, right? All right, so yeah, so like, the theory that's got the chances in it, it's got a shorter description, but it doesn't predict all the evidence.
So I suspect that's not quite right, but it depends on the kind of domains of local determinism, as you might call it. So you get quite a lot of stuff where there's compression. It's just that there are places everywhere where there's a chance, you have to feed in a bit of data by hand.
Yeah.
It's not feeding in all the data by hand. I'm not sure whether this is right or not, but that's my hunch.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, like when I thought about why I believed in modality, like I wasn't thinking about quantum mechanics and stuff. Like when people told me that there was this thing called necessity, I thought the basis for it was basically like you have intuitions that things could have been a certain way, and somebody describes something, and you go, yeah, it seems like that could have, it could have turned out that Newtonian mechanics was true. And like, so like in your view, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that I would have thought is part of the data that leads you to posit modality, that you're rejecting.
Yeah, that's right. So if it couldn't have turned out that the world was Newtonian, according to me. I mean, in the metaphysical sense, we need probabilities for another thing, which has to do with our ignorance, right? And so there are, some people call them epistemic probabilities. I'm going to call them doxastic probabilities. You need, if you're going to gamble, for example, you need those.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But so would you say that, you apply probabilities to possibilities that aren't really possible? Because like we've got to consider, we have to consider theories where the laws of physics are different, right? And like on your view, those are impossible. right? Like
Yeah.
all
So
theories about the
sure.
laws are impossible. So then,
So suppose you were doing kind of theory selection of theories of everything, then you're going to be talking about theories that by your lights couldn't possibly be true. And so I don't think when you're doing that theory selection, you can actually attribute probabilities to the theories. I'm not a Bayesian
they'd all be zero.
at that level. I think there are limits to the ways in which you can sensibly attach probabilities to things. So I don't think that there's a probability that you could have given, say, in to Newton's theory being true, say in 1710 and 1750 and 1830 and 1870.
yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a determinate probability, but like if you say like there's no probability at all, like this makes it hard to understand, like how you can talk about theories being supported or not supported, or more strongly supported.
So that I don't know whether we want to go down that route right now. I mean, there are things to say, but we've been going for
Yeah, you did, Dr. Oppy, you did trigger him by saying that Bayes has its limits, because so that could have started a whole new conversation. Well, okay, so the infinite, we just had this long conversation, you guys did, about the infinite past, and that's important because if the past is finite, then Dr. Huemer, your argument for us existing now collapses then, right?
The argument for reincarnation, it requires an infinite past.
Okay. And an infinite future, or just the past?
Yeah, also infinite future. Well, like because if the universe ends in whatever sometime, you might not be reincarnated again during that time, right?
Right.
I can't predict how long it takes, so it might take longer than the amount of time we have left.
Okay. Well, awesome. Let's go ahead and ask some questions here. We got a little bit more time, folks. So go ahead and put your question in the chat. I already see some coming in, and like I said earlier, the super chats will get priority. So let's start with our one and only super chat here. This one is from Stephen Dillon. To both, what's at stake? What is lost by introducing non-physicality to account for the mind, and what's lost by broadening physicality to include the mind? And I think you guys know which respected person those are directed at.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think about why I'm saying the mind is non-physical. It's not because I think there's some cost to saying it's physical. It's because it just doesn't seem to me like what we call physical. Like, as far as I understand what physical means, and I don't understand all that well, but it's sort of like, I guess I understand the concept physical by some examples. Like, okay, like size is physical and mass is physical, whatever. And then, like thinking about Paris, man, it doesn't sound like the same kind of thing. Like, that's why I'm saying that. So, and anyway, if somebody wants to say, no, I'm just going to use the category physical to include mental things, I'm like, okay, well, whatever. Okay, then I just think that that's a verbal mistake, or just think you're using the word physical in a weird way, or whatever. But who cares?
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Oppy.
So I don't know. The what's at stake questions when it comes to philosophy are often kind of hard to answer, I think. One thing that you might think is that there are lots of people who have worldviews where they think that there are supernatural minds and think that we have a kind of supernatural dimension, right? It's not that we're destined for reincarnation in this universe. We're destined for some supernatural destination where we're going to be reincarnated and so on. And there are kind of practical stakes about whether you're going to be a member of a religion that has that kind of view or not. Right? So that's one way of thinking about where there might be stakes.
Yeah. All right. Well, following up on that one, Dr. Oppy, here's a question for you. If you believed in souls, would you believe in libertarian free will?
Oh dear, counterfactuals are so difficult to start with, and this one's got,
Yeah. I guess it has to do
um,
with which one's more fundamental for you, right? Like,
um, so yeah, so given our conversation, if by believing in souls we mean not just thinking that there are that there's this kind of interesting relation between mental properties and other properties, but that there's a substance, I'm probably more firmly committed to. Yeah, I don't know. I don't like either of them. And I don't see them as connected either. I have kind of independent reasons.
okay.
I think libertarian free will, if you take the standard kind of principle of alternative possibilities, really is very unattractive.
Mm.
So the and maybe if you can have a kind of agent causation account without the principle of alternative possibilities, as some people seem to think you can,
Yeah.
then maybe that would be more attractive than the kind of we have supernatural souls.
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of
That makes sense. Well, so Dr. Huemer, in case you don't get to respond, what is your response to Oppy's argument that indeterminate randomness seems to refute the consequence argument?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so like what I said wasn't exactly the consequence argument per se, but it was about why determinism was incompatible with free will. So you could say, oh yeah, that's fine because like we don't have determinism because of quantum mechanics or something.
Right. Right.
So I mean, you'd want to say something else about why like an indeterministic physicalist view would be a problem for free will. You want to say something like, well, I mean, it kind of just like makes it seem like your actions are random, like, and not under your control. You might think, oh, but then, why isn't it true that your actions are random even with dualism? But the thought is, well, there's a special problem if your actions are caused by some totally, blind, non-conscious things, right? And so I was sort of assuming, and then this got challenged, but I was sort of assuming that if you're a physicalist, you would be like a bottom-up causation kind of physicalist. So you would think, all your actions are determined by the stuff that the microscopic particles are doing, and then they're completely blind. They don't have any reasons. They don't respond to reasons. So, then it's going to be that your behavior is going to be determined by these physical things that don't respond to reasons. Then it doesn't matter if they're deterministic or indeterministic.
Right.
And then, so, like the only way to get free will is to have, like the thing at the higher level, like the mental properties are causing the behavior.
Yeah.
So that was my thought.
Yeah. Well, so I want to push that back on Dr. Oppy there, and just add in maybe like over determination there. Maybe it doesn't work, right? But Dr. Oppy, can you respond to what Dr. Huemer said there at the end?
So I'm thinking about your remark about overdetermination. I mean, one of the standard worries about the kind of bottom-up view for philosophy of mind is that it's going to make all the, if you thought that there was any kind of separate causal power that attached to, say, beliefs and desires and the causation of action, there would be a kind of causal overdetermination because what happened would be determined by the stuff at the lower level.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking that there aren't determination relations of that very strong kind between the scales, you won't have that kind of worry.
Yeah. Does the strength matter? Don't the physical particles, whatever they may be, superstrings, don't they still need to be in the right spot in order for you to have such such a thought, or are they completely, once you get up to the next scale, it's completely not attached to the bottom scale?
Well, no, there's definitely attachment. So if you think about the region of space that your body occupies and then think about some low scale,
Yeah.
right, there's going to be particles down there and there won't be anything else filling that space.
Yeah.
But the question wasn't about the stuff, it was about the properties.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Oh,
I guess, yeah, Dr. Huemer, please.
Sorry, do you accept supervenience, like that the the mental properties supervene on the arrangement of the microphysical objects
so,
and properties?
so there are supervenience relations. So think about the kind of picture in pixels, right? That's a standard view. I'm thinking about supervenience in the kind of roughly in the kind of Jackson Lewis way. So no change in the properties of the image without some change in the pixels. Presumably, no change in your mental state without some change in the arrangement of the particles. But that's a very, very weak relation, very weak.
Yeah, but
And
I
it's
mean,
and
like
sort
it's
of consistent with the point about the impossibility of defining the kind of high level properties in terms of the low level properties.
yeah.
Right. I mean, there are stronger versions of supervenience, stronger versions than that weak one, but then I'm not inclined to accept the stronger principles of supervenience.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm so tempted to stick with the argument from reason type stuff here, but we do have another super chat here. To Huemer. Do your views on minds have any non-obvious philosophical implications for animal minds? If so, what are they?
I don't know. I mean, so like I assume that animals have mental states, or some animals have mental states. Like I assume that your dog, he has visual experiences. When you come in the room, he sees you, whatever. Like he knows that you're going to feed him, and he wants the food, whatever. Okay, beliefs and desires, all that. So he has a mind. So it's non-physical. I mean, so I guess those are the obvious implications.
Yeah.
Like one thing that I wondered about was like, hey, can you be reincarnated as a non-person animal? And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that, and I hope the answer is no, because I don't want to live as a non-person animal. But I have no way of answering that. Okay,
So,
but there might be some interesting implications if if you can be reincarnated as animals, maybe you should think more carefully about how you treat animals. Yeah.
So one question there though is, I mean, resemblance seemed to play a big role. So the idea was that there was going to be this essentially a kind of duplicate of you, qualitative duplicate of you at some point in the future that would be you, because there's another bit of the argument about sort of what matters for personal identity. It's not clear that how animals, are going to get into that story really, because your dog's not that similar to you.
Yeah. Well, or any particular dog is probably not that similar to you, but maybe there's some dog that's really similar.
Well, I don't think so though, right? I mean, think about the genetic differences and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, when I was thinking of the argument, I was led to the argument by thinking about, eternal recurrence. Actually, I was led to it by thinking about the multiverse, because I read Leonard Susskind's book about this. And I started thinking, hey, and the multiverse people are talking about how like, oh, there's going to be like a duplicate of you in some universe. and then I started thinking, whoa, why isn't the duplicate actually me? So then why am I not having the duplicate's experience at the same time? Okay, but then I realized that you don't have to have other universes to have a question like this. Like even in one universe, like there's going to be a duplicate of you later, and maybe that will be you. Okay, and then so that's how I started thinking about reincarnation. And like when I wrote the paper, it sounds like the eternal recurrence is essential to it. But later I realized that it's not. But the eternal recurrence is on account of how reincarnation might come about. But it's not the only possible way that might come about.
Okay. Yeah.
So like maybe you have a soul, and maybe there's some just unknown conditions that cause your soul to go into a living thing. And then, that living thing comes you.
It's like a metaphysical law.
this is now getting much closer to certain kinds of Eastern metaphysical views about the nature of reality. I think once you've gone that far, the typical in Hindu thought, but also in Buddhist thought, that there's a fairly long scale over which for a single cycle, but reality is just made up of a series of cycles, and from one cycle to the next, or even within a cycle from one lifetime to the next, you can come back as a cockroach.
Yeah. So I'm more skeptical about cockroaches because I'm not sure they're even sentient.
Yeah. Does rationality? I know you said you're not sure on this, but do I have a rational soul? Dr. Huemer, can we follow like Descartes in that? Does the cogito give us that or anything such that I can't be a cockroach, I can't be a dog because I have a rational soul and he doesn't?
This doesn't sound to me like compelling reasoning. So, look, I mean, when I think of the soul, I just think like it's the mind or it's the subject of mental states. So like there are these mental states which you can argue are non-physical, and if you accept that, then you're like, okay, and what are they states of? Oh, it's states of this thing called the mind. And then somebody says, hey, look, in addition to the regular soul, I have this other thing called the rational soul. Then I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, because like the subject of my different mental states, there's one subject of like my rational thoughts and my sensations and my emotions, like those are all had by the same me. So there's not more than one soul. So
but so qualitatively, can we get at a qualitative difference between like a dog soul and my soul? Why does the dog not have the capacity for speech that I have? Is it just because he has a different brain than me that allows him to have different mental states?
Yeah, that might be. Yeah.
Because then we might have to tell a different story about the mental state, supervening on the physical state, brain state.
Yeah. No, yeah. He doesn't talk because he doesn't have a speech center in his brain, or whatever, like because he doesn't have the genes that evolved over the course of some millions of years for speech.
But in principle, he could be having like the same kind of soul that I have, and just really frustrated that he doesn't have the speech center. Maybe he's screaming internally, right? Is that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he yes, but he wouldn't know what speech was, so he wouldn't be frustrated that he doesn't have it. Right?
Oh, because you say that he doesn't remember. But if he has the capacity, it's like an unrealized. Oh yeah, if it's unrealized, okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so like, I don't know. I don't know whether you could come back as a dog or something. I think you could come back as a member of another species, but I don't know whether it has to be another intelligent species or, but I was going to say something else that I've forgotten.
Oh, sorry about that. Just jump in when you get it. Here's another one for Dr. Huemer. Is the existence of souls equally likely on theism and atheism? And I want to push that to Dr. Oppy as well.
Yeah. Well, let's see. If there's a God, I guess God is a soul by definition, right? He's going to be a physical object, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So then
I think so.
Then the answer is it's more likely on theism because there's a guarantee, like probability 1, that there's at least one soul. Okay. Also, maybe you mean human souls. Okay. Well, yeah. If there's at least one, if you know that there's at least one soul that's not human, that raises the probability that humans have souls, right? So I guess.
Yeah. Dr. Oppy.
I guess it depends on your version of theism. So if you, as Mike just suggested, if you're thinking about God as a person, then you're going to, and you're thinking of this is a person without a body, right? Non-physical person. You are going to be stuck with a soul, and so it's right. But there are views of the divine that don't make God come out as having personal attributes of any kind, and so then we have this kind of difficult question about, okay, so which is the more likely view?
Right.
When it comes to theism, I don't quite know how to assess.
Someone needs to write a book about arguing about gods or something, and then we can get straight on this. Yeah. Okay. Just a few more here. Following up on a similar thread there, this is for Dr. Huemer, but also I'll pose it to Dr. Oppy. How probable is theism? What's the best argument for theism, in your opinion?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I like this question because it lets me plug, this book, Knowledge, Reality, and Value, in which I do talk about theism. It's an introduction to philosophy. The best argument, that I know of is the fine-tuning argument. How probable is theism? I really don't know. It's really hard for me to assess. So I think some of the things that are traditionally said about God, I think are metaphysically impossible. Okay, but also I think
do you
maybe
have
they're
any
not
examples there?
essential.
Sorry.
Being all powerful, I guess I think that's metaphysically impossible. Being infinitely powerful. So I think you could have any degree of power, but there's no maximum degree of power, and you can't be infinitely powerful.
Infinitely power, yeah.
Right? Sort of like how, there's no largest natural number. So there's just natural numbers getting bigger and bigger, and infinity isn't a number.
Yeah.
So that's analogous to how I think there's no property being maximally powerful. There's just more and more degrees of power. Okay.
Couldn't maximally just be the highest amount? I get the infinitely powerful.
Yeah, there's no highest amount, right?
Yeah.
It's like the largest number. There's no
'Cause you could
largest
have-
number. They just get bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway.
Yeah, sure.
That's like that. Okay, but I think you could have a view that's recognizably theistic without saying all the things that are traditionally said. So maybe there's an extremely powerful creator, intelligent creator, who's also extremely good and extremely knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And then, is that God? It's so I guess you could call that theism. So in that case, then I'm agnostic about theism.
Okay. And his son is, Jesus Christ, maybe even, and he died for your sins. And no, we're messing with the probabilities here. Sorry.
Yeah. So you're making the probability lower, but still possible as far as I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think there are two explanations of fine tuning. There's the multiverse, and then there's intelligent design, and they're both amazing, right?
Wow.
Which, by the way, I do not mean a sense of praise, right? Being amazing means it's less likely. On the face of it, those are amazing, but they're the only two things that somebody has thought of. So, you're which one of these is less amazing? I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Oppy.
So just on that point, if you go with the kind of McCall style Aristotelian view of modality, you get a different account. I mean, it depends whether you think that the fine tuning is, the values are fixed in the initial state or not. If they're fixed in the initial state, they're necessary. So there's the explanation. If they're not, then what you've got is some sort of chance transition because they weren't fixed. They go from being not fixed to fixed, in which case, doesn't matter what the probability is, you're committed to that explanation anyway, because there's numbers, the size of the improbability doesn't matter once you've accepted that it was just a chance transition.
Okay.
So there are other options that have been considered, though many people think that these options are kind of crazy.
Yeah, Philip Goff says the universe designed itself in his cosmopsychism. And I guess that'd be in a similar case as your chance, where now the probabilities go out the window because it's a personal cause, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to talk smack on this position because he's not here. But
well, yeah. So I don't know. So, I don't know if we want to say more about the fine tuning thing. Some of the responses to the fine tuning argument, I think, I think are bad because they would also be responses in hypothetical scenarios in which surely you would have evidence for theism, right? So suppose that somehow it was built into the laws of nature that, there are certain crystals that when they form into the shape of the letters made by God. Right? And there's these different crystals that form made by God in all of the languages of the world.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And then, but nothing else. And then but to stipulate that it's built into the laws of nature. Okay. And so then, if we have one of these responses to the fine tuning argument that says, oh, you can't assign probabilities to the laws of nature, so you can't infer anything. So then that response implies that even in the made by God world, you have no reason to think that there's any kind of intelligent designer, right? And like, come on.
Okay, so that doesn't so that doesn't sound good for the certain views, but it doesn't seem to touch the Aristotelian modality view.
Well, no, I mean, like, so like in my scenario, so like it was always built into the laws that, there would be these made by
Yeah.
God messages. And so then, so
but,
then
but,
like
but the
on
truth, but the truth is that what you're talking about is impossible, right? I'm assuming there are no such crystals.
Are you 100% certain that it's impossible?
So the question about certainty is kind of interesting at this point. No, right? It will be crazy to take the view that you accept to be certain, but still, if the view that you accept says that certain things are impossible, then that's what you should think, right? That is your view. It's just that you hold it tentatively. It's open to revision. Right?
But I mean, I think,
which is kind of sensible. But,
but if there's like,
but then we answer the question by looking to see what our view says.
No, but I think like if there's, a possibility, if there's a possibility that the made by God world could happen, then I think there's an intelligible question as to what you should say, or like what would be confirmed if that were to happen.
So I don't, but then possibility in what sense? Is there a metaphysical possibility? I think not. If you mean, could somebody dream up this speculation and then we could think about how that speculation squares with the evidence that we've got? Well, in that case, not well, because we have none of these crystals. And I think we can be very confident that we'll never find one of them.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
if the question is, what would we think if, this is sort of like Hume's question about the voice from the sky, what would we think? Oh, actually, I don't know what we think in that circumstance.
Yeah. But I mean, we wouldn't just shrug our shoulders and go, well, it's necessary that it's that way, so it doesn't need any explanation.
Sure. That's probably true, right? But then what you've got there is something, I think, different from the fine-tuning of the constants. So I mean, maybe I'm not convinced that there's a very good parallel between the kind of the crystals. So I mean, you did say built into the laws. I'm not sure how that's gonna work exactly. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I haven't worked out the physics model.
Yeah,
that makes that happen.
we still got to find these crystals, and then we can backfill it and figure it out. Well, Dr. Oppy, what do you think? Is there a best argument for theism, and how probable is theism? A lot of people will know what you're going to say here.
Well, you can probably guess. I mean, on the theory that I've got, theism just turns out to be impossible. Right.
Yeah.
So one way of going is to say it gets probability 0.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go that way unless you just say what's the probability with respect to your theory.
Right.
Because I don't think as I just said, it would be absurd for me to think that my theory was certain in all respects. That would be just crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's very useful to talk about probability beyond this. What I think is that there can be reasonable disagreement. That there are other worldviews that very smart people hold that disagree with mine in ever so many ways, because that's the nature of philosophy and metaphysical speculation. And it can be perfectly reasonable for people to accept some other view. So that's the kind of how I want to talk about these things. I just don't want to talk about probability.
Yeah.
In this context. I don't think that I sort of have probabilities for beyond the relative to my view. I don't have another set of probabilities that says, well, Bill Craig's view gets this much, and Richard Swinburne's gets that much, and Alvin Plantinga's gets that much, and Mike Huemer's gets so much, and so on. Right? I just don't have probabilities like that.
Yeah.
On the question, what's the best argument for theism? Well, obviously, some kind of cumulative case argument. So, I mean, Swinburne, I think, has the most developed cumulative case. So, I think that his is the best argument that's been put together so far, though I expect that there are theists who could put together kind of better cases than his if they bothered to take him as a model and try and set out a kind of cumulative case.
Yeah. If they took Swinburne and posed it at the universe starting in 1950, then it would presumably be more likely. So maybe I'll try. Maybe we're onto something here.
Right. Well, there's lots of options. I mean, there's
Yeah.
lots of controversial from kind of Christian viewpoint. There's lots of that's controversial about Swinburne's
You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's
argument,
right.
and so you can feel, you can develop an alternative, but that seems to me to be the right kind of model.
Okay. All right. So we have just two more super chats here. Dr. Huemer, at what stage of evolution did souls emerge? If already answered.
Yeah.
Just join the stream.
No, we didn't answer it. Of course, I don't know, but I mean, it was whenever there was first a conscious being. I don't know when that happened. I didn't even know which beings are conscious now. So,
so I've thought about this question too, and I mean, I suspect that that consciousness actually goes pretty low down, maybe lower than you think. So maybe worms are conscious. I mean, I'm not wedded to that opinion, but sometimes when I think about it, I'm kind of tempted to think that just a few layers of neurons will be enough.
Interesting. Right. Okay. Well, so. Oh, sorry. Dr. Huemer is muted. Yeah, please.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe this is not exactly answering what the person wanted, but yeah, actually, in my view, souls existed forever. There's no time it emerged. It's like infinite into the past.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's a maybe I can tease this out a little bit. Dr. Huemer, you believe in evolution, though, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there was at some point where, well, I don't know. I guess it depends on what you say about souls, but this type of soul, I couldn't exist as me 2 billion years ago or whatever, when my ancestors weren't on track to weren't me yet, right? So is there a certain point at which a human soul can then enter in? Does that make any sense? You get more?
Oh, yeah. So presumably there are some physical conditions that are required for you to have a life, right?
Yeah.
Like an object has to have certain physical characteristics in order for you to be able to inhabit it.
Yeah,
as your body.
That's why I'm not in the desk right now.
Hopefully. Yeah, and I don't know what these conditions are. Okay, but yeah, probably took a couple billion years or maybe it took 4.5 billion years for there to be the first thing that you could have occupied.
Okay,
right? Because that's when there was first an intelligent being.
Yeah,
or there was first a brain capable of supporting intelligence.
Yeah. Okay, and I guess just a quick follow up: when we're disembodied, do we have rational thoughts, or do we need a brain in order to have rational thoughts?
Yeah, no thoughts. Sorry.
Okay. Dang it.
As far as I know, like, why do I say that? Well, like, if you suffer brain damage, then like it damages your reasoning ability and stuff like that. Like, just any of the things that you do can be impaired by suffering brain damage. So after you die, your whole brain is going to be destroyed. So you're not going to be doing anything.
That's true. But if Tony Stark suffers damage to his Iron Man suit, he can't fly. But then you put him in a new suit, and in that intermediate time, he can still do Tony Stark things.
Yes. That's true, but I mean, that's because he's like a whole being without the suit. I mean, but like we don't have the evidence about Tony Stark that we have about people, like, because we have evidence about people getting brain damage and just like, well, I don't really know this, but like I'm assuming, like everything that people do can be impaired by some kind of brain damage. I think that's true.
Everything? Now you're asking, Graham Oppy's right here, man. I don't know. There's someone's going to point to some counterexample.
Yeah, well, like if that's not true, that would be amazing, right? And that would be like proof.
What kind of amazing?
Yeah, I think it would be amazing too.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. This one's related, but it's just moving up the timeline a little bit. For both, when in fetal development does the soul / consciousness emerge? Does this have implications for the abortion debate? No pressure. It's not a super hard question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a great question, right? And of course, like I have no way of knowing this because I don't remember. Like I was a fetus once, but I don't remember, or I don't know if I was a fetus. Maybe I was only a baby. Okay, but yeah, so well, the soul appears at the first time that there's a conscious experience. Okay, but actually, your soul always existed. It's eternal. It's just that it became like a particular body became that soul's body at a particular time. I don't know when that happened.
Yeah.
But also, I'm not sure that this has the implications for abortion that you'd think that it does. So, because like on my view, well, you already existed. You were just like unembodied. So if you're at the time during fetal development before the soul inhabits the body, there's the soul is still there. So it's still true that there is someone who you're going to be harming if you destroy the fetus. And just like after the soul goes into it, there's someone who's going to be harmed if you destroy the fetus. And that, by the way, and I don't know what the implication of that is, right? But also, by the way, like, and I guess, if you're worried, if you think that it's unethical to destroy the fetus because there's somebody who will be harmed because like they're going to have to stay unconscious instead of being conscious and embodied and having life, well, that's actually true if you just refrain from producing a child and you could have produced, right? There's somebody.
Yeah, they weren't in the queue yet.
At the time who would have become embodied, and then you're going to stop them from being embodied.
So there are some other problems about kind of infinite mathematics here. If you really think that you get kind of incarnated infinitely many times, it's not clear that missing one is actually going to make any difference to your well-being.
Yeah, that's right. There's great ethical questions about this, right? Like, how should we, if you're a consequentialist, how should you calculate the consequences that matter? Like, should you sort of like look at each person and to like, like if you had a choice to be embodied or not at some particular time, and that lifetime was going to have positive value but lower than the average value of your lifetimes, should you take it or not? Right?
Yeah.
So, right. So
well, if you don't take it, maybe you think the average will just infinitesimally go up. So.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the question. Like, do you just look at your subjective sequence, right? Or do you look at do you sum value over objective time, or do you sum value over like subjective times, so to speak?
Yeah. You guys just made everyone a bunch of antinatalists. So there's that. Well, I wonder if you don't know whether there's a person in there or not. It's kind of like the demolition of a building, right? Like if you don't know if someone's in there or not, don't dynamite the building. It's like if you don't know, and you don't know if it's going to actually, if it will cause harm, and you don't know their subjective calculations on if they're if they're trying to just have one life, and they'll be super awesome, and then their experiences will be great. They're trying to avoid being reincarnated. If you don't know that, then don't dynamite the building.
So there's this argument from moral risk. I mean, just like more generally, if there's something that you're not sure if it's extremely morally wrong or not, but like there's no case for it being obligatory, then like there's a strong reason to not do it. Right? Like, even if you think it's probably not wrong at all, but there's a chance that it might be extremely wrong, and also it's definitely not wrong to not do it, then like, don't do it. Right?
Yeah. Then you'd have to, so then people are going to be arguing about whether it's obligatory or whatever. Dr. Oppy, what do you think about this?
So, as Mike said before, we have quite a lot of information about sort of brain activity and mental states. And so probably we can be very confident that in the fetus, to the point where we have kind of brain activity of the relevant kind, there isn't going to be a soul attached. That seems fairly solid, I would have thought. The question is exactly where that happens, not in the first trimester. I would have
Yeah.
thought.
Well, and I guess it has to do with like the how you characterize like the value, I guess, of the fetus, whether it's like able to do that function now or whether it's potentially it will if left untouched it will grow into that and um
So the first question was just when does it
oh yeah,
happen?
right. When does it
And so I'm thinking about the answer to that
gotcha. Yeah, that's good.
question
Thanks
and
for that.
thinking about what data we would have to go on. And I
Okay.
think we've got some
Okay.
data
That's a
there.
really helpful clarification. Someone sent in one last super chat and it actually connects a little bit. I'm not sure whether the question was asked, but assuming we will be reincarnated, what effect might this have on the ethics of killing? And so, yeah, like is it less serious to kill an immortal being or immortal and then also immortal that's going to be reincarnated a ton of times? Oh, oops, he's muted here. Dr. Huemer, sorry about that.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah, you might think, oh well, like the total value that you experience over infinite time is infinity, regardless of whether you get killed or not. So maybe maybe there's no reason not to kill someone. Okay, but the thing is, like that reasoning, like that would be the if that's correct, like that destroys consequentialism in general, right?
Mm,
It's like the value of the universe is infinite, or it might be negative infinity. But anyway, it's either
yeah.
positive or negative infinity, and it's going to be that no matter what you do in any situation. So, like, you know, if you buy this argument, then oh, no reason to do anything or not do anything. Like,
Yeah.
presumably that's
So,
wrong. Presumably, you're supposed to look at some more limited range of things, like look at the consequences of your action. Maybe you restricted to the consequences of your actions in this lifetime or something. You're supposed to add up those, see
Mm,
whether those are overall negative or positive or something.
okay.
so if you have the view that the universe is finite in the past and spatially finite, then you aren't going to be committed to the infinity of value. I mean, given what I take to be the facts about what the future is going to be like. So consequentialism will survive in some frameworks against this objection. It's just in the kind of infinite universe, infinite reincarnation, there's going to be
Oh yeah. Well,
lots of problems.
yeah, I was assuming an infinite future, and I guess that there will be other living things going, going on
Yeah.
forever. Uh, you might think because of the heat death of the universe that there will be a permanent end of life.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
proton decay and the endless expansion and just no more protons after that.
Hmm.
yeah.
Maybe
Is
will
it is
be
there
enough.
actually is there a zero probability of a proton being generated from radiation?
So I think the answer is yes, but I'm not. Don't quote me on that, right? I'm not.
Right.
I'm not sure, but I think that there is that the kind of
Okay.
after on the so so the book that I'm quoting from is a little bit old now, so it'll be useful if there's another book that some bunch of cosmologists have written about the likely future of the universe that might answer that question.
Yeah.
But I think it is zero.
Okay. Okay. I hate to do this one last. This is like a $10 one, so it's huge. No one ask any more questions after this one, please. It's funny to say that because they're super chats, but I want to respect these gentlemen's time, and I'm already intimidated having them on here. Okay. So, for Dr. Huemer, if life needs a biological substrate and always arises through a process of evolution, average incarnation would likely be a net positive. Is that plausible? I find this emotionally comforting.
I don't wait. I didn't understand why you said average incarnation would be a net
Mm.
positive. Is this like you're assuming that most living things have good lives? Is
If
it?
life,
Uh,
man, I
Actually, I'm not seeing the connection between the first part, between the antecedent and the consequent of that.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, Actually, like I have a blog post at one point, talking about what the value of the universe is, and I think it might be negative infinity, because like, okay, you probably have a positive utility life, but when you think about like all of the other, like almost all conscious beings are non-intelligent animals, and their lives are shitty.
yeah.
Like constantly in danger of starvation and like being eaten alive by other animals, like whatever. And like when it's raining, you can't get out of the rain. You just have to sit there. If you get sick, like there's no medicine or anything, you break your leg, you're just gonna die and whatever.
What if they're loving it though? Because like we don't know what it's like to be a bat, right? So what if they're just like, I love echolocation, you know?
So I think you should focus on a different case, which is the history of humanity and the percentage of people who don't make it out in the first year or two. It's not clear that their lives are a net positive, and they make up probably the majority of people in history.
Yeah, maybe you have to sort of look at person years, right? Not persons, right?
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, okay. So the average incarnation, that's not quite the question. It's the average over incarnation years would be positive.
Maybe that's the issue.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for this. This was fantastic. I'm glad we made it through. I'm unscathed, I think. I feel good. I was really nervous about this, but thanks for both of you for all your time. And again, like I said at the beginning, we really appreciate you guys. We've learned a ton from you, the internet community, public philosophy, and you guys do it in a way that is fun. You do take like requests that you probably shouldn't. So I've seen some of you guys, you go on with these crazy folks. Maybe I'm one of them, but
crazy folks like Parker.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I really appreciate you, and just a big thanks from everyone. We love hearing from you guys. Thank you for doing it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for organizing and everything.
Yeah, definitely. All right, folks.
Yeah,
well,
I'll second that.
Thanks, Dr. Oppy. Yeah, this has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.